O. Lexicon, baby. Ozo eze O. Country African boy. Ozo eze O. I like that.
What's up, y'all? I'm Lex-Jordan Ibegbu, and today on Wahala Talk we have a very special guest. We have a truth teller, a voice for the voiceless, someone coming in for power in the new regime, and a bastion of hope, Miss Monika Johnson-Hostler. How are you doing?
Good. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for taking time out your busy day and coming to chop it up with me. It's greatly appreciated. So I know you're a busy woman. You're ripping and running, getting ready for that congressional race. So
absolutely.
We're going to go ahead and get right on into it.
All right.
So I saw in 1995, and it was a ways back, so Jodeci was popping back then.
Yes, they were.
You were 21 years old and you started doing sexual violence work.
Yes.
And back then we didn't have a language for that. I mean, the language that we heard when you listen to songs from that era, like Ain't No Fun and things like that.
That's right.
So problematic. So how did you step in that purpose, and how did people perceive that?
Oh, that's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
So I stepped into the purpose for me. I would say it came to me. My freshman year at Hampton University, one of my hallmates was sexually assaulted. For me, it was the first time that I had language. And it's now that I'm 44, I look back and it was typical. It was somebody she had been on a few dates with. He was a football player. He sexually assaulted her. She didn't think anybody would believe her. So in 7th grade, I took an aptitude test that said I was going to be a helper. So from 7th grade, I thought I was going to be a therapist. And so for me, my immediate response is, we did not have Google. But let me look up and see what this is. And she described what it was. So I called the health department. That was the only resource that I thought as a college student would know how to help. And they actually didn't. They referred me to a hotline, which now I know to be the Rape Crisis Center. And I gave it to her. The choice was hers. It was anonymous, free, and she could share her story. And she didn't. She left school. It was the first semester, 2 months into our freshman year, and she didn't return. And I left Hampton after my freshman year and went to Fayetteville State. Got to Fayetteville State, and someone else told me they were sexually assaulted off campus. And so that's when I actually started doing the research and went to a professor who was really good to me, and I said, I've never heard of this. I don't understand it. Why is it happening? And she recommended I reach out to the Rape Crisis Center, and the rest is history. So I tell people my work, my life work, my heart work is a ministry that came to me, and I'm glad I was obedient. Now, what I will tell you is I graduated from college early, took a job at the Rape Crisis Center in 1996, and I called my grandmother to say, hey, I'm not coming home because I have a job. And she said, oh, that's great, but we want you to come home. And my mom was like, nope, your job was to go to college and get out of Thomasville. So I described to my grandmother the job, and she says, that ain't no job. I mean, and verbatim, who gonna tell you about that? And she was like, it ain't gonna be black people. And I said to her, well, 2 black people have told me, and that's why I'm doing this. And that has been my pathway since 1995.
So at this point, given the movement that's come up, we're fixing the problem, and it's great to see that we're fixing the problem, but there's a causality to the problem, and that's the ideology. You was talking about being on college campus, and I was at Carolina, and I saw all those things.
That's right.
So how do we get to the crux of that ideology and alter that? Because if we only fix the scab, then we won't fix what's causing the scab.
That's right. So I've learned the language, right? So that language is, and a lot of people in public health use this, because I do say to people, like, the prevalence of sexual violence, if we look across the lifespan from children who are molested to adults and young adults who are sexually assaulted by whether it's by a stranger, but most frequently by somebody they know, we're talking 1 in 4 women. North Carolina did its own study in the early 2000s, and it was 1 in 5 women. So that's a pervasive number. And so when we look at the causality, we look at the research, the Center for Disease Control has said that it's an epidemic for our country, so it's a public health concern. So we talk about going upstream. How do you teach people to change the behavior so we can actually prevent this from happening in our society? And so much of that is, at the end of the day, how do you value the most vulnerable people? We don't, right? Women and children, in any book, any sociology book, and actually any group of people, they know the most vulnerable people in their community are women and children. And so if you look at the way, and I always say the least of thee, right? So that's a person of color, someone who's living in poverty, somebody who's not able-bodied, someone who does not consider themselves straight. Those things put us in more harm's way. And for children, they don't have any identifiers other than their children. And then so those, when sexual violence happens at that age, it's because it's a very different ideology, right? Like the adults who perpetrate on children, there's a wide spectrum, but there are two things. There's either someone who really is a pedophile, who that's a mental health issue, right? That we deal with diagnoses and support. But then there are also people who really are about harming those who don't have a voice. And then you move along the spectrum of the lifespan, and at the end of the day, the commonality that we find across the lifespan is the lack of dehumanizing and devaluing women and children. And men are also harmed, but if you look at men that are harmed, it's more frequently before the age of 13 for boys. And for men that are harmed, they're often men who, in some degree, identify themselves as someone that they feel like the person felt was vulnerable. That they felt vulnerable to the assault that's happened. And so my job is really to talk about how do we change the culture of society and how do we ensure that we actually lift up, that we live in a culture that actually celebrates, whether it's through song, music, our culture, our language. I mean, one of the things that I initially did when I came at the state level was, for me, when I came here in the 2000s, people was like, yo, man, I feel raped by that. Okay, that's not appropriate language. So something as simple for people as changing our language is a first step in changing and really addressing the underlying causations.
Because, life and death is held within the power of the tongue.
Absolutely.
That's a fact. If you speak positivity, you'll get that. If you speak negativity, you'll get the same thing.
And I think my life speaks to that, and I'm sure yours does too. What you speak into your life, we can bring to fruition.
That's a fact. I agree with that.
That's right.
So let's pivot for a moment.
Yes.
I know you did work with the Wake County School Board. You state that you want a system, now correct me if I'm wrong,
okay.
You state that you want a system where every child can learn. But how does that come into play when we have different cultural backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and teachers who may not understand how to talk to, dictate, or conversate with these different types of students, and that hinders every child being able to learn in that circumstance?
You're absolutely right. And that's why people like myself who have different circumstances and different backgrounds should be involved in the education of all of our children. So I'm a firm believer that the educational institution, by virtue in this country, was not structured and set up for people like me and you. It wasn't. And then when we created schools that Black and brown folk and poor folk could go to, guess what? Those schools were separate. When we integrated schools for all the right reasons, and I do believe in an integrated, diverse school system, that when we did that without taking into consideration what does that mean for both sets of students, teachers, and administrators. And if you talk to anyone in Wake County, which our school system did, when Wake County Public Schools were merged, it was against the will of the community. It took leaders to believe that the best way for all students would be together. What they also knew is that you'd have to do the work. We don't just integrate students to put them in a building to say, hey, we've achieved greatness. We integrate the schools so that we can understand the ways in which we're going to have to interact with each other. And one of my reasons of coming onto the Wake County School Board was I became very interested in the school system when my daughter was about to enter the school, and that's when they were resegregating the schools, de facto segregation. So I live in the most southern eastern part of the county, just past Southeast Raleigh, in the county of Wake County. And what I knew then in visiting the schools, that they were all Title I and that they were low resourced. Now, I believe my child could excel because I'm a parent who has the ability to push back against the system. I'm not afraid to talk to the system about what my kid needs. What that turned into, back to this need to say, well, I don't mind telling people what I think. So I started talking to neighbors. I started talking to friends, and I had a friend come up to me and was like, yo, you should run for school board. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm not interested in running for office. I like being on the other side as an agitator. And it took a while, and I finally said yes, and I still see myself in that role. Just like in my anti-sexual violence work, it's the same thing. How do I get underneath to the surface is what's preventing our kids from learning when they come to school and show up different than what the norm is, what teachers expect. Wake County, 87% of our teachers are under the age of 30 and they're white. And many of them come, I would say the vast majority of teachers come because they want to teach all students. What we don't take into account and what they are not taught in their pedagogy is how to meet kids where they are in that space, how to respect the families and the culture that they come from, and shape how you integrate their culture into that classroom. So we're starting to do that. We have the language, we have the research that says we can actually teach you how to meet kids where they are, but we also have to give teachers those resources. And so my slogan in 2013 when I ran is still the same. I want to create a system where students can learn and teachers can teach. And that means everybody has to have the resources and the real talk. Race is a real talk, right? We can talk race and poverty. If we do not talk about those things in the ways that we want the best outcomes for students, then we don't get best outcomes. And so I'm a strong believer that we got to talk about the hard topics to really ensure that teachers are ready for the students who are coming in those classrooms, and they're also ready for the families, right? Like, my grandparents raised me. My aunt and uncle could show up at that school and make the exact same decisions that my mother could. Well, that's not what the school system expects. We expect a nuclear family to be a decision maker. And so we really have to prepare our schools to be able to address family dynamics so that that student and that family feels accepted and loved in that school. Because what we know to be true is relationships matter. If we connect, you can teach me. If we don't connect and there's a disconnect, then more than likely, especially the younger I am, the more likely I am to shut down. So that's what I believe. I believe relationships matter, and I'm invested, and I believe teachers want those relationships to matter to them. And we just have to make sure that we're talking about the hard things and resourcing it.
I definitely go through that. I speak to kids at Ligon, and they ask me, well, this teacher doesn't like me. This teacher doesn't. I don't get this. But and it's so sad that I have to tell them that. Well, to a certain extent, the onus is on you until we can do better as adults. But back to what you said about de facto segregation and being integrated and fighting for integration. What do you say to those voices who say that integration was bad for Black education?
I would say that the data points to they're probably right. I don't disagree with that because it was integrated is still not equal, right? So our language in integrating, Brown versus Board of preempting us to really look at integration, it was about separate and equal. We never got equality separate or integrated. So what I say to people is we live in a society that we have not done the work, and I mean as a people, as a society in the United States, to really value people no matter where they are in life. And until we believe that as a culture, then as long as it's separate, we're not going to make it equal. And we can say but we're not, right? If I look at the sheer numbers of teachers, who's going to teach our babies? We don't go into teaching profession for lots of reasons. You and I are educators, and there's lots of reasons. They're low paid, so many of us, if we go to college and we make it out, we're going to choose careers that, one, feed our soul, but two, also feed us, nourish us, and money. And so those things are real things, and until teachers are valued in our society, then I push back on my colleagues, like, okay, so if we separate, then how do we make it equal for our babies? And so right now, what I know is the tools that are best used in an integrated system because I can use those same tools that they're coming at me at. When we were separate, we didn't have those tools or resources. And so we don't have a structure to address that. And I tell people all the time, I'm here to reimagine what education could look like because we don't have the answer. Wake County alone, I look at those babies, I'm still saying to people every day, 6 years, and have I done anything? And people say, oh, you shouldn't say that, but I did this because I wanted to see difference in those babies' lives. I don't want to go to a school and kids say, they don't like me, I can't learn, this, school's not for me. That's why I ran, so we wouldn't have that happen. And so the work is not done, and I'm here to reimagine with anybody who has ideas. And I'm not a no person to anything that we can try, but I also tell people we also know it has to be resourced.
That's a fact. So being that it has to be resourced, you've spoken about funding. And the necessity for funding, whether that be with the students and resources in school or with teachers' salaries, with them marching and protesting. So for whatever reason, it's become a partisan issue.
Absolutely.
And how can we bring it out of being a partisan issue, being that the children of Republicans, the children of Democrats, the children of Libertarians, or populists, whatever, all in school together?
That's right. So I would say what we've done is taught our children the tools that separate us versus teaching them the tools that keep them joined. people say this all the time, and some people believe it's flippant and tongue-in-cheek. I don't. I believe that children go to school and by virtue are connected to people are like them, and it doesn't impact them by the hue of their skin until we teach them that it does. Or about socioeconomics. We teach children that. They don't come to us with that. And so until we as adults remove all of the stigmas and issues and concerns we have and not placing those burdens on our babies' backs, then we're not going to be there, right? So when we talk about what's partisan of education, I remind people the public education is a foundation of this country. It is a cornerstone. To dismantle it, right, without having an alternative means we still don't win. And by we, I mean any of our babies who are still need to go through the K-12 school system. And we could talk further, but we'll focus K-12 now. And so I say to people, those children don't have partisanship, and neither those teachers. We partisan anything that will keep the negativity going, because at the end of the day, politics have become about the win and not the community. And I will continue to run for office because I'm here to speak that truth to power. I'm here for the outcome of people. And do I have a party affiliation? Yes. Do I always ride with my party? Maybe not. Because if it ain't really right for the people that I speak for and speak to and speak with, then I'm not going to ride a party line just because it's a party line. And I think that's where we've come. We've become so divided. Everything has become divisive in education. I will tell you, while underfunded, I would say in the last decade, it has become far more partisan. And I think it's because partisanship is what's fueling the political climate right now.
That's a fact. You even saw that with Koch brothers and UNC.
Oh, yes, sir, we do.
So, you spoke saying that, your grandmother paid for your education. But that was during a time when a middle class salary could pay for a college education. Since then, our college educations have inflated and the salaries have not inflated.
Absolutely.
So how can we remedy that?
So a thing that I think is important, and nobody's actually ever brought this up for me. So when I talk about my grandmother paying for that freshman year, I went to Hampton University. It was $22,000. I spent 1 year there because when I realized how she had to, my grandmother worked at Thomasville Furniture, and so did my family. They all worked in manufacturing. They didn't have salaries that could afford $22,000. They borrowed it because they didn't understand student financing. So it took her decades to pay that off. Now, so the rest of my college career was student loans, right? Because I went home and I realized what sacrifice they had made for me. And I understood that that's a sacrifice that should be mine, not theirs, because they had sacrificed to take care of me because my mother had me as a single parent. And so that's, I would say my grandparents did that because they didn't understand systems and infrastructure. What they knew is my way out of Thomasville, North Carolina was a college education. And they were willing to do whatever that looked like. And that meant they could work overtime. My grandparents walked to work. Nobody had a car. And so I saw the sacrifices they made. And what I say today when I talk about funding for public schools, it's the public school. Our colleges, public institutions. They should be affordable for our children. I actually believe they should be free, honestly. And that's why I say we'll talk K-12, but I believe those first 4 years should also be free. That's why I believe in the early colleges in Wake County, so our students could leave us with 2 years under their belt. We say education is a cornerstone of our country, but we refuse to put our dollars where our priorities are. And that's what I say all the time. Your hard work's got to line up that budget. And so where I would put my money is where my heart is. And for somebody who had education as a leverage to remove me from circumstances and to better myself, and every day I reach back, look back, and I hand back to my family because that's why I'm here. And trust me, as the first college graduate, every single one of them, all of my cousins who didn't go to college, prop me up and still do to this day. And I think it's important to speak to that. But I don't think we currently have a culture who believes that our wages should match funding for public education, whether that's K-12 or college. And I think we have to call ourselves into question about what our priorities really are. And education should be a priority.
It should be. And you speak a lot about public schools. But as of recent, there has been a big push for privatization of schools and charter schools. And we see some benefits with this, like, you saw Diddy partnering and starting that school, which is really empowering kids and giving kids knowledge of self. But do you think there is a malicious undercurrent which is pushing this sentiment of privatization of schools forward?
I do. So this is what I tell people all the time. Do I believe in economic drivers and free market? Of course I do. We live in a capitalist society, like it or not, that's what makes this world go round, especially these United States. So for me, and I'm very clear with people, I came onto the school board not anti-charter at all, right? Because I believe circumstances are necessary for us to examine as parents and as communities of what's right for our kids. What I will tell you, when we talked about whether things became Republican or Democrat or right or left or conservative or liberal, that's what I think we did in this state and also across this country, is charters by the charter of charter schools say that they are created to be innovators and to find solutions for the gaps that exist in public education. I'm here all day for that. That's not what we've done. So when we look at privatizing public schools, which is charters because they are publicly funded, we did that. Like, we can look at LeBron School, Diddy School. Those are the examples that the actual charter in our education statutes say. But if you look in Wake County, it is racially divided. And again, you heard me speaking to that. Until we can reimagine how that system's going to be fair, if we look at charters, you can see the funding distinct. Now, we take out the big name folks who privatized it, right? So we got to remove Diddy, LeBron, and all those. And there's some that I would believe started in North Carolina that were set for the right reason. We're sharing their innovation with public schools so that we can meet the needs of all students, because charter schools can't hold all students. So I always say to people, you don't have to tell me you like charters or love them or hate them. I'm asking you to actually question what they are doing. So when you talk to charters, what are they doing? Are they ensuring that they're not extracting the best and brightest from the public school, leaving the least of those in the school without the resource? Because charter schools they don't have to pay for transportation, they don't have to provide lunch. So tell me who you think can do that, right? Honestly. If you don't have transportation and lunch, who's going to that school?
Only the ones who have money.
Who can afford to. So if you look at our charters in Wake County alone, literally you see the racial divide. Now, do some of those charters have some, and I do use air quotes, some diversity? Absolutely, because they have a lottery. They can choose their students. And so I would beg the question, are we really talking about, free market if you can choose if you can choose your students, then is this parity? And so currently the structure is they can choose their students and leave the ones that they don't want. The ones who are high needs, they leave them right into public schools because they don't have to pay to resource them. And so that's what I would say about charters. Vouchers is a whole nother conversation. I mean, for me to take public dollars and say, initially they targeted, so my first year running is when the vouchers were coming into full play. I received so many beautiful, colorful brochures to say, your family is eligible for a scholarship because I'm married to a teacher. Our economic threshold was just at the level that we could get that initial $5,000 from the state. Well, how much does it cost to go to Ravenscroft? Not $5,000, right? So what private school am I, someone who is literally working middle class, where could I send my kid for $5,000 to a charter school? To a private school. So again, I go back to question, are we talking about parity or not? And so all things equal, I'm here to have a conversation about multiple options for education. But as long as those things aren't equal, then it's my job to call out what's happening.
Now, when you declared that you were going to run for Congress, running out of District 2, this was a district that stretched. People don't realize how big North Carolina is. Stretched from Fayetteville to Nash. It was long.
Yep.
And I remember looking at the district and figuring, I don't know, whoever going to run that district going to put some miles on that car.
Yes, that is true.
But now they're redrawing it.
Right.
It's looking like, and those more rural, and Linda Coleman ran in that, and most progressive black candidates, when they're running districts like that, it's hard for them to
Absolutely.
Win. Now may include the majority of Wake County.
That's right.
So what gains and benefits do you see coming from that? What downsides do you see coming from that? And what adjustments will you make?
So what I would say is the maps are still gerrymandered. Bottom line, that's where I will start at. I'm from a rural community, so for me, I, like you, I was like, am I doing this? And there was a whole lot of praying going on about this decision that I made. And I was committed to being in those communities to hear what those, so there were parts of 6 counties, to your point. 6 counties were included in District 2 in the current makeup of it right now for the incumbent. So he has 6 counties. I was committed to getting to know what each of those communities needed, because I do believe those needs are different. Representing Wake County, Southern Wake County on the school board, what my constituents in Raleigh needed was not what my constituents in Fuquay needed. And that's in Wake County. And so I understood that as a school board member, and I believed in talking to my constituents. And so that's what I believed for this district. And I went into all those counties and started asking questions, finding those leaders, but also finding people who had never been involved in politics and didn't really understand what Congress did. And for me, I liked connecting with people to say, because they were like, well, why would we vote for Congress? What does Congress do? And so for me, it was an educational opportunity with a lot of miles, but it really allowed me to touch people. So I believe that was a benefit, because this district currently did not have a spokesperson in the current George Holden, who holds that seat now. People wanted to talk, they wanted to share, and I wanted to be able to bring their voice to Congress to talk about what do we need in North Carolina that is in the purview of a member of Congress. So that to me was the benefit, to be able to connect to the rural part of my upbringing in this district while living in metropolitan Wake County. And I felt like I could join and marry those two things well. So that's the benefit. The downside was it was very rural, highly unlikely that a Democrat could win. But I do believe, Linda Coleman paved the way. She knocked down some barriers and got as close that a Democrat has gotten. And I felt like, I believe in standing on the shoulders of those who've gone before you. And I felt like this was a time that there were voters that were eager, that I'd be able to energize and come to the polls. They call them low propensity voters. I was here all day to talk to those low propensity voters to really get them to the poll. It wasn't going to be easy. Yes, I was going to have lots of miles, and I assure you I would have been exhausted. I'd have been in better shape, but I'd have been exhausted. So that for me, while that was definitely going to be a challenge, the benefit is I would have been able to represent those voices with it now. And also the benefit is nobody was really here for this, right? Like people weren't really interested in this race. There were 3 of us, 2 who've never ran for office or elected in office, and then myself, also the only woman and the only person of color that was willing to step up to a challenging district to really give voice to the people in that community. Because we also know that Linda Coleman won that primary because we show up in primaries. And by we, I mean black folk, and by we, I mean primarily black women. We show up to vote in primaries. And so for me, that would have been my starting point. And for the general, we really would have just energized voters. I believe that that's what I'm good at. I'm good at getting people excited. One, because as you can see, I'm all in. I got a big presence. But now that the district is going to be, we assume until the courts go into session on early December, and tell us what they believe about the new districts. It's majority Wake. The benefit is it's bluer. And it does have rural, if we consider, like I said, Fuquay and other small communities in Wake. But for the most part, it's going to be very left-leaning, whereas the previous district was +6 or 7, depending on which poll, Republican-leaning. So the benefit is it's a smaller geographic distance, but it's more populous, right? So it's a lot of people. The whole Wake County could have been a district in itself, because we have 1 million people. So technically, we could have been a single district, just Wake County. So it's definitely would be easy to circulate in. But at the end of the day, I wasn't born yesterday. There are going to be a lot of Democrats who want to get in this race because it's blue, and I'm going to remind them, where were you when it wasn't? And so at the end of the day, I still believe that I'm a qualified candidate. I still believe I'm here because this is bigger than me. And I also still believe that I'm in this race and going to stay in this race regardless where those lines are, because the few people in each of these counties that I've connected with, they're here. They're ready. They want to be engaged in a race and talking about top issues that they've never discussed. So we talk about at the top of the ticket, the same issues Congressional members talk about, but I kept it real with people. I was like, tell me about your life, and then I'll tell you which ways Congress interfaces. So public education is federally funded, right? So our state funds it, our local county government funded, but it's also federally funded. This divisiveness that we've created around public education, guess where that started? Congress set those statutes for charters and privatization without really setting a real tone for how to ensure that we have parity and equity across all districts in this country. When we talk about not just access to healthcare, but access to adequate healthcare in rural communities, again, most of our rural communities, they don't have hospitals because guess what? They've been privatized. So they're closed or they're owned by a larger hospital. So rural communities have to travel further to get hospitals. Like those are the things that I was really having real conversations about, because we talk about, oh, is it single payer? Yes, that is important. But to the citizens who want to vote for members of Congress, I needed them to hear me say, what do you need from me?
So I'll just leave this for one last question for you. I know you have to run around, and so again, I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
So it's about to be 2020. Everything is timing. That's everything. It's in God's time.
That's right.
So do you feel like right now we're in the helms of a new reconstruction in which you can ride the wave when you see who's getting elected to Congress right now?
I'm hoping I'm at the front of that wave, because I want people to know that we can lead. We don't just have to follow. And I do believe we are there. I do believe that we have to energize and excite our folk to be there. Right? So we can't leave it to chance that people are so over the divisiveness of this country, the rhetoric of this country, you know, and I can't believe I'm about to say this live on film, but I do believe it. Our current president brought up the ugly vial of who we are. But let's just be clear, it was there. And we can just see it. And so what I say is, I do believe that people believe that all of us have good in us. And, you know, the Bible speaks very clear of this, and I do believe this is such a time. And so we can call it a blue wave, we can call it our next reconstruction, and I believe all those things are true, but I do believe that people are ready to be heard and for their needs to be met, and their expectation is that they elect people who will do just that.
So, and I'll just add one more thing. So a lot of times when reconstruction comes, that crow comes to kick.
That's right.
So are you fearful that, you know, at the helm of all this progress, Jim Crow will come back and shut the doors and push those progresses back into the sand?
So this is what I would say, to your point, right? Know thy history. I tell young people all the time, don't tell me you don't like history, because if you don't understand it, we will repeat it. I do believe that we are at a space and a moment that there are enough of us who are galvanized, who are ready and willing to actually be in community with everyone. Now, the issue is, if we move on this wave and forget who our community is, we will repeat ourselves. And those doors will be shut. We will be revisiting Jim Crow in a way that we've never saw. But guess what? We're there. When we talked about the divisiveness and the racial divide that we've seen in the divisiveness, I believe that God allowed those layers to be pulled back so we will know what is available and what we're capable of. So I do believe it is possible, but I also have enough faith to believe that I am in this space because I'm hopeful. And I'm believing that as long as we speak truth to power, that we have the ability to not repeat that. But it's coming. Now, let's not be naive. We're not going to ride this wave and those things not show up, because they will rear their ugly head. We just have to be bold enough, brave enough, courageous enough, and steeped for me in my faith and my belief in my God and my community that we can endure to the other side of what's right for and just for all of us. I couldn't work in anti-sexual violence without believing that we can create community where all people can thrive, right? Otherwise, my work would be futile. And so I'm an optimist. I believe we can do it. I'm also a realist, and I believe we can't do it by ourselves. And all this has to be in community and in partnership. And so the thing that I say to people every day, let us not forget where we've been so that we can move forward arm in arm, because every visual you have of real change showed community regardless of race, color, creed, geography, religion, arm in arm. And I think that's what we got to be clear on, because we are much stronger together. But I do believe that those evils are there. We have to choose to not let them prevail, which means we got to put in work.
Well, the work is coming. I know you're ready. So Congressional District 2, you know,
I'm
be ready. 2020 is coming. It's very important. It's imperative that you stay aware of what's going on, because it is affecting you. We're seeing changes all around us. But I just want to thank you so much. You spoke some real things, some truth to power. Again, this is Miss Monika Johnson-Hostler. She's running for Congress. Y'all be on the lookout for her.
Yes.
And until next time, this is Lex-Jordan Ibegbu, and this is Wahala Talk. Peace.
Peace.
Ozo eze o, country African boy. Ozo eze o, I like that there.